The quiet flame of Luxor. He stood beneath the weight of the moon, not as a man, but as something carved elegant and ancient, as though time had shaped him with deliberate cruelty and beauty in equal measure. The balcony stretched out from the palace like a marble wound stitched to the edge of the desert, curved stone bathed in the milk glow of night. Below, the Nile curled silently through the bones of the city, carrying with it secrets older than breath, older than gods. The air was thick with myrrh, with heat, with silence, the kind of silence that lingers in rooms where someone once died too quietly to be mourned properly. He did not lean on the ledge like a man who wished to fall. He leaned like someone who had already fallen and simply chose not to speak of it. The gold at his wrists caught the light in trembling shards, stacked in silent testimony to a life lived under surveillance and silk, the kind of wealth that meant nothing when your freedom had been sold for it. He was the youngest son, and no one had expected him to survive long enough to matter. Yet there he was, hair still damp from the evening bath, slick and wild down his back, lips stained with the ghost of pomegranate wine, and eyes fixed on something no one else could see. His name was Amen, though no one used it in the way names are meant to be used, no intimacy, no familiarity, only duty and formality. In the inner walls of the palace, they called him the Quiet Flame. And it was not meant as a compliment. It meant he burned in places no one could touch. He was not cruel, not overtly, but there was a distance in him that made cruelty unnecessary. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence did it for him. Servants feared him because he never issued threats, only instructions, and yet somehow you knew that if you failed him, it was not punishment you'd fear, it was his indifference. That night, the court feasted behind him, laughter echoing off polished stone and mosaic glass, but he had slipped away before the second course. He always did. They thought it was arrogance or boredom or grief. It was none of those. It was control. He could not bear to be observed without choosing how. That was how they took his brother from him, after all. Not in blood, not in violence, but in humiliation. The older prince, the heir, the beautiful one, charismatic, desired, beloved even by enemies. He had smiled too much, trusted too easily, and died too slowly beneath the weight of political failure and fatherly disappointment. Amen had watched it all, had listened to the click of sandals down the corridor the night they dragged his brother's body through the back gates, wrapped in linens not fit for royalty. He had not wept. He had not screamed. He had walked barefoot across the sandstone courtyard the next morning and kissed the mouth of the throne without a word. That was how he mourned, with precision. Now, standing on the balcony, the city at his feet, he looked like an idol they forgot to pray to. The ink on his arms, forbidden by scripture but tolerated by fear, coiled like curses turned inward. There were symbols there, one beneath his collarbone, another across the ribs only visible when the robes slipped low, and no one knew their meaning except the artist who marked him in silence one summer night when he was 16 and had not spoken for 3 months. He had not spoken because he had been betrayed by someone who touched his face like they loved him, and lied anyway. The tattoos were a promise to himself to never trust softness again. He'd kept that promise. He let lovers enter, but never stay. He allowed hands on his skin, but never near his neck, never near his mouth, never long enough to know how he smelled after sleep. No one could describe his voice when relaxed. No one had heard it. A figure entered the balcony then. One of the minister's sons, delicate and unsure, lips parted in nervous apology, clearly sent by someone else. Amen turned his head slowly, the moon outlining the sharp slope of his cheek, and simply stared. The boy froze. There was no need to speak. The silence pressed its weight between them like a warning. The boy nodded quickly, bowed too deeply, and left. Amen returned to the horizon. He did not turn to watch the party. He did not ask what they wanted from him tonight. Political leverage, sexual attention, forgiveness. It was always one of the three, sometimes all. The rings on his fingers shimmered faintly as he raised his hand to touch his own mouth, reflexive, as though trying to erase a memory before it burned through his composure. He had been in love once, truly, fully, the kind of love that makes you want to bleed a little slower so they don't notice when you're dying. It wasn't a palace love. It wasn't a boy from the court or a servant or even someone acceptable. It was a man from the salt fields, older by a decade, and harder than anything the palace had prepared him for. The kind of man who spoke in short truths and longer silences. He had touched Aemon like he wasn't a prince, like he was breakable. It was the only time Aemon had cried. In the man's arms, silent and trembling, unable to hold the weight of not being enough for his own family but being too much for anyone else. That love didn't last. Nothing that tender ever does in places this cruel. But it left a scar beneath his breastbone, one no robe could hide. He watched the moon rise higher, and below, a single barge moved through the river, its lanterns trembling like tiny suns. He thought briefly of escape, of what it would mean to walk barefoot into the desert, to leave everything behind, gold, name, power, memory. But then he heard a voice echo through the open window behind him. His father's laughter, low and deliberate, followed by the familiar scrape of wine being poured into stone. And he knew again that he would never leave. Not because he couldn't, because he needed to stay. Someone had to be the ruin of this empire from within. Someone had to carry the truth in silence. Someone had to remember what it cost to be beautiful and quiet and touch too gently to scream. So he stayed. He always did. He stayed because the palace needed its quiet flame. He stayed because no one else knew how to burn beautifully without turning to ash. And as the night deepened, as the wine soured in the room behind him and the moon crowned itself king of the sky, Aemon remained on the balcony, golden, haunted, and entirely alone.